Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. No, it's not time to talk National Football League or any college football. It's all of our focus on March Madness. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we tip things off around here, I want to encourage all of you, our loyal listeners, if you haven't already done so, go to FanDuel.com, use the promo code BetTheBoard, take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses and incentives that FanDuel has available for you. And just in time for the tournament, they also have a Bet the Bracket risk-free. You're going to log into FanDuel Sportsbook, you're going to opt in for the promotion, place any wager on college basketball as long as it's a money line less than minus $2, and take full advantage there. If things go haywire for you, you'll get a refund in site credit. FanDuel wants to be your official book for all things NCAA tournament related. And Payne, I know you've missed the sound of my voice, although we did have a chance to do dinner in your neck of the woods not too long ago.
That is true. By the way, your boy Meach firing shots.
When does he not fire shots? I mean, this is what happens when Jets fans get angry about their free agency spending. They have to decide to redistribute all that anger, and apparently it was hurled in my general direction.
That is true. And sometimes that's an actual good direction. You can just fire aimlessly and be correct most of the time.
I guess that's one way to look at it. There's no doubt about it. But it's good to be back after a little bit of a break in the wake of the Super Bowl. Plenty of NFL things that have transpired as well. And obviously don't want to go off on a tangent because we have plenty of ground to cover, but did want to get your quick take on what we've seen so far in free agency and some of the bigger marquee names that have been on the move. Of course, we wait for another big domino to fall here on a Wednesday morning in Deshaun Watson. I had to. You're a football guy.
I hate it. Let's just do this another time. Because we're running up against it, right? Like Tom Brady's back. What's my synopsis of Tom Brady? Like, he's good.
You're just happy that Tom Brady's not in the AFC, I guess. That's the biggest thing about it.
I think that's the interesting part about this. Like, if you're a Browns fan, I know you're super excited that he's entertaining you. But if you're the NFL, like, what are we doing here? Like, this is going to be like the most lopsided of conferences known to mankind. Like, how many young, good quarterbacks can we throw in the AFC and make this an actual competitive league? I think that's partly why Tom Brady came back. Obviously, there's the running joke that Giselle saw him put on a duvet cover and immediately Tom Brady was back out of retirement. But I think he saw basically what was transpiring in the NFC, and it's like, who's there? Russell Wilson left. Kyler Murray hates his team. The question mark with potentially the best team in the NFC is what's going on at quarterback with the San Francisco 49ers. Like, there's not a ton there aside from Aaron Rodgers, and I think ultimately that's why Aaron Rodgers elected to stay with Green Bay. There's just nothing in the NFC right now. And even with Tampa Bay specifically, right, they're losing guys. Now, they acquired Mason from New England, which is a monster get yesterday after losing Kappa, and you lose a guy who to early retirement in Ali Marpet. But yeah, I don't know. I just think it's interesting. Let's see what winds down. We'll do an off-season podcast when we have a little bit more time here. Let's all
right, we'll keep this to hoops then. I did, obviously, when I get a chance and you get the airwaves, have to get your take. Being an NFL guy, I know people hang on your every word in that regard. But to your point about talking about the AFC and NFC, hey, look, the NBA intervened. They wouldn't let Chris Paul go to the Lakers. Maybe the NFL decides to do that and keep one of the best young quarterbacks away from what is already a loaded conference, as you allude to. But let's dive right in.
That's the annoying part about this, right? Like, obviously no one's going to ever reach Tom Brady's stature and touch the 7 Super Bowl rings. But we're going to have to put an asterisk on how we gauge some of these young quarterbacks. They're all in the same AFC. Like, it's going to be like Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow. If Deshaun Watson goes, like, none of these guys are going to get 3+ Super Bowls at that rate, right? Josh Allen, throw him in the mix. Like, none of those guys are going to compete with that. So it's going to be very, very difficult to kind of gauge things. Okay. On to the
Peyton Manning never got the free pass. We're not giving it to these young kids either. But all right, let's get right into the games, and we're going to try and cover as much of the landscape as we can. We're not here to break down all of your brackets and tell you what your Final Four and your national champions are going to look like. What we did is try to go through, identify what we thought were some of the most intriguing opening round matchups, and try and give you a nugget or two as far as power ratings, matchups, and things to look for in terms of where the market is heading. And Payne, I think you picked out the perfect team for us to start with. That, of course, being the Arkansas Razorbacks, knowing my affinity for their fan base and the love that they showered on me last year when I made some comments about how Eric Musselman was going to match up with Chris Beard. But on paper, Arkansas has their hands full in their opening round matchup against the Vermont Catamounts. You're looking at Arkansas, a 5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 139.5. We saw Arkansas at their best, really clicking on all cylinders down the stretch. Went 11-2-1 against the number in their last 14 games. After starting the year 10-8, they rattled off 15 wins in their next 18 games before they ran into the buzzsaw that was Texas A&M in the SEC tournament. Meanwhile, they'll oppose a Vermont team that ran roughshod over the American East. John Becker, an outstanding coaching job, as this program will seek its first tournament win since 2012, trying to win its first round game in the round of 64 for the first time since 2005. We won't relive that because I don't want to dredge up painful memories for you as a Syracuse Orange fan. But when you look at some of these teams from mid-majors, Vermont extremely methodical and efficient on the offensive side. Will the jolt to the system be too much when they face the level of athleticism they'll encounter in the Arkansas Razorbacks?
We started because you apparently hate
I do not hate Arkansas in general. Do not put words in my mouth. Do not piss off.
I mean, you called out their coach
I
last year.
did. I did call it. And Chris Beard let me down. He couldn't design a play with 90 seconds to go in the game. But Arkansas fans and I have developed a love-hate relationship. They love to hate me. And I think it's a perfect place for us to break down their opening round game here.
Okay, so South Point opened this 8. And within about 4 minutes, they were down to 5. I think the rest of the market opened like 5.5, 6. That was the true opener. And I think even at that price, we've seen respected money on Vermont. It does make sense. Our power number is more like 4 on this game. And then you factor in some home court advantage. Like, it's a 7.5 hour drive from Vermont to Buffalo. What else is going on?
How dare you during ski season? How dare you during ski season take shots at the great people of the Green Mountain State?
That's true. That's true. Like, in Arkansas, I don't think has any people from there. Just don't have any. Why are we going to that part of the country? And that it feels like there's going to be a little bit of a home court advantage for Vermont. And then you think about UConn fans, like they're going to be there for the night session, probably rooting for the upset as well. So our true number, when you factor in a little home court advantage, like Arkansas -3.5, and you hate to kind of go all layman, but simplest form, like Vermont this season is better than Colgate was a season ago by a wide margin. And I think those two teams are kind of similar in style. We saw Colgate take Arkansas to the brink in the opening round. Final score I thought was very misleading. It was a 2-point game in the final stanza, and then Arkansas kind of pulled away when some idiot from Colgate decided to showboat after a layup and kind of woke Arkansas up a little bit there. And we power rate Arkansas a tick down from last season's version. So just kind of in the simplest form, you can see how this will make some sense. I think the game comes down to which team can obviously dictate style and pace, because these two teams are drastically different from each other. Vermont, to your point at the top, very much a slow the game down, half-court team. Arkansas wants to go end-to-end, play ragtag basketball. That's where their athletes thrive. So if you look at Vermont, 288 in adjusted tempo, Arkansas's 28th. Arkansas shoots about a third of their shots in transition. Typically what we've seen is when a team that wants to slow the game down doesn't turn it over, it's far easier to slow a basketball game down than speed one up. Vermont right now, 16th in the country in turnovers. Very senior-laden lineup. They aren't an offense that likes to crash the offensive glass either. They get back on defense, so they only give up about 23% of shots in transition. So you kind of have the makeup here of an underdog in Vermont that's really likable. And if Vermont can slow the game down and they don't turn it over and they force Arkansas to score in a half court from their designed offense by remaining fantastic defensive rebounders and not allowing transition attempts, then I think we're going to have a tight game here. But how Vermont actually pulls off the upset is all of that happening while drilling threes. And if you look at Vermont, they take about 37 three-pointers per 100 possessions. Arkansas is outside the top 130 defending the three ball. Arkansas also allows opponents to shoot nearly 40% of their shots from three. So there is that matchup here that just makes a ton of sense. And again, regardless of result here, the formula that has pro bettors backing Vermont is pretty simple, that they can slow the game down, they don't turn it over, they rebound their own glass, and they can shoot some threes. I think the question mark, obviously, Todd, is the competition level. Is that going to be too much for them? Because we have seen when they step out a little bit in competition, they do look drastically.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the $100 million question with a lot of these programs. And when we hit on some of the Power 5 conference teams against some of the mid-majors, it's will it be a jolt to the system? If you can withstand that change in speed and athleticism for the first 8 to 10 minutes, it puts you in good standing. And obviously, like you mentioned, Arkansas was able to use some of that speed and that physicality to wear down Colgate over the course of 40 minutes. Vermont wants to play a little bit more, to your point, in the half court than Colgate, who wanted to get out and run. And the nice part for the Catamounts is they have 2 players they can lean on. So it'll be important for Ryan Davis, who is the back-to-back American East Player of the Year, comes in averaging more than 17 points a game to hold his own, and a local Vermont product in Ben Shugu, who's scored in double figures every game since they flipped the calendar. To Vermont's credit, and sometimes this can be a deterrent, they absolutely steamrolled through the American East Conference Tournament, and maybe that suggests they're playing their best basketball. I mean, their only loss since December 7th was a 1-point defeat versus Hartford, and when you're talking about some of these mid-majors, you love to see them coming in playing with confidence. Arkansas, we'll see if they're up for the task in covering this number. You talked a little bit about UConn and being a well-represented contingent there from Storrs heading across I-90 to Western New York. They'll take on New Mexico State. The winner of this game will obviously meet the winner of Arkansas-Vermont. UConn right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, a 6.5-point favorite. This number has ping-ponged around from 6.5 to 7. Total on the game sits at 131, and it's the first ever meeting between these two schools. UConn, meanwhile, looking for their first Sweet 16 appearance since they won the national title with the improbable run as a 7 seed back in 2014. Credit to Dan Hurley. Its turnaround continues there, inheriting a sub-500 team in the wake of that aftermath, and has produced their best record to date for the Huskies at 23-9. Meanwhile, on the other side, New Mexico State, a perennial power as far as mid-majors go. They'll make their 26th tournament appearance, lost to Auburn 78-77 the last time they were in the Big Dance, but this is also a program that's 0-11 straight up the last 11 tournament games they've played, with their last win coming back in 1993. You'd hope that New Mexico State, having played a slightly more rigorous conference schedule with the addition of a couple of Southland teams, would be ready for this task. And don't sell New Mexico State short. Over the last 5 seasons, the 3rd best winning percentage in all of college basketball, behind 2 other non-Power 5 programs in Gonzaga and Houston. Payne, if New Mexico State is going to be successful here, we know Teddy Allen can flat out fill it up, but do they have enough on the perimeter to slow down R.J. Cole, but maybe more importantly, to slow down Sonogo at the rim?
All great questions. And you mentioned Dan Hurley at the top, and I think he's probably the most prominent, most public coach in this game. But I think Chris Jans is fantastic, and he's a Greg Marshall disciple who I am familiar with. And so I really liked this hire when they made it, and Chris Jans has proven to be top shelf at this point. You mentioned that win percentage, 83% wins in the last 5 seasons. But he's never beaten a team rated inside our top 35. He's 0-6 against teams we have power rated in there. And UConn right now sits on the fringe of our top 20 for context. If you go back to 2019, when New Mexico State played some tough teams, they hung well with Kansas early in the season. The Jayhawks were beat up in that game. And then they took Auburn to the brink in the opening round of the tournament that same year. I believe we were on them in that game.
Yes, we were indeed on them. Yep.
Is that correct? Okay. And then you look at the other 4 times New Mexico State's faced a top 35 team under Jans. 0-4. They've lost by an average of 18.5 points. This is a major step up in class here. The Western Athletic Conference has a negative rating as a whole, 14th toughest college basketball conference per KenPom. New Mexico State hasn't played a top 40 team all season. So while the schedule's increased, it's really not anything that they've faced at this caliber. But what is really interesting matchup-wise is for a team that doesn't start anyone shorter than 6'4", and they only have one guy in the rotation under 6'4", New Mexico State's outside the top 100 in defensive rebounding. And I think ultimately that's a problem here. UConn's number 1 in offensive rebounding. They're physical. They want to beat you up. And UConn does a really good job turning offensive rebounds into points. They're number 2 in potential points scored off second chances. They're 9th in second chance conversions. So the Aggies are going to have to match that physicality, right? Like, they're not giving up points that that aren't from the initial offensive set. That's kind of the key here when I look at this. You also look at the Aggies. They don't do any of like the little stuff well outside the top 300 in turnovers. Maybe they get away with that here. UConn doesn't really turn you over. They only attempt about 5% of their total shots off a steal. New Mexico State, also outside the top 250 in free throws. You're going to need all the cheap points you can get. I do think this probably comes down to how well UConn shoots the three ball. The Aggies do a pretty good job defending inside, but about 43% of the shots the Aggies give up are from three. So this could be a game with a little bit of variance. I also wonder where New Mexico State gets their points from. It's not an efficient team from beyond the arc. This is obviously a one-game sample. I just don't see how they score here, right? Like the Aggies are much more efficient scoring inside, but UConn 16th defending mid-range shots, 11th defending near proximity shots. So where is New Mexico State going to score here? I don't think we're going to see a lot more movement from where we're at now. 6.5 kind of feels like fair when you factor in UConn probably having a little bit of a home court advantage, about a 6-hour drive from Buffalo. I do know a couple guys that took the Aggies plus 7.5 at open. That is why we're at 6.5. 7 typically does have some value in the regular season. That's typically the 3-score point where teams stop fouling towards the end, although in the tournament, last game potentially of the season, that extends out a little bit more. But the matchup just isn't good for New Mexico State, and that's ultimately what's kept me off this game to this point. UConn, for as lucky as they have been, shockingly one of just 4 teams to rank in the top third of the country in both net shot quality and strength of schedule. So, yes, we can look and we can hear about UConn being lucky. They're also pretty high up in a lot of metrics that are really reserved for some of the
Such
best
an
teams.
interesting quartet of teams here because you could see them going a variety of ways that if UConn is able to get through an upset bid from New Mexico State and take on either Vermont or Arkansas, I'm not quite sure which of them would pose the biggest challenge should seeds hold and you see the UConn or Arkansas winner taking on Gonzaga in the round of 16, given the fact that Gonzaga ain't afraid to get out there and run. There's no shortage of athletes there, and they'll have bigs for days to match up with UConn or be able to take advantage of Arkansas in the half court. But, of course, we're getting ahead of ourselves, and it'll be a game that we can talk about next week at this time, should we see things go according to suit. From the West region heading to the East, and one of the more attractive games involving 2 very good mid-majors. Naturally, the committee couldn't give us an opportunity to watch these mid-majors match up against some of the big boys that would be reluctant to play them during the course of the regular season. The 2 teams I'm referencing, of course, Murray State and San Francisco, and it's Murray State, a 1-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game sits at 136. And when you look at USF, they'll be making their first tournament appearance since 1998. First at-large bid for the program since 1982. Meanwhile, Murray State, well, we know about their postseason success. And the last time that they were playing in the Big Dance, they were led by one of the NBA's rising stars, if he isn't already there yet, John Morant, the 18th appearance in the Big Dance in program history, but they have never made it to the second weekend. When we look at these head coaches, Payne, Matt McMahon in his 7th season in charge of the Racers, Todd Golden, who comes from the Bruce Pearl coaching tree in San Francisco. I mean, both of these guys are destined for big jobs. In a one-game setup like this, do you give one of the head coaches an edge, or where do you think this basketball game can be won?
They're both great. I mean, the committee did neither of these teams any favors. None. I think San Francisco's wildly underseeded compared to their metrics. They're more like a 6 seed. Murray State's been fantastic. You mentioned Matt McCann. I think he's kind of proving his mettle, right, and building Murray State up after John Morant left. So for anyone that thought this program was like built on one player, clearly you're wrong. There's some interesting stuff with this game. Early on, and I mean very early on, a group took Murray State +2. They took them +1.5. We're now seeing that Murray State's a favorite. There is a little bit of an injury situation for San Francisco, although you saw the Dons head coach come out and say multiple times that he thinks their starting big man, Johan Molsulski, I believe is how you pronounce it.
We'll butcher plenty of names, so we'll call that correct as far as arguments are concerned.
He's battling a knee injury. Can he go? Is he going to be 100%? I think he's massive to this game where you look at where potentially the matchups lie. Things get tough here because I think ultimately, I think from what we're both hearing is there could be a battle on this game, right? I'm hearing that potential love for San Francisco could be coming in and that there'll be a battle on this game. We'll see if it ultimately materializes. In an Excel sheet, right, there's one group that I respect a ton that has San Francisco power rated 40 slots better than Murray State. This group absolutely hates Murray State. And so that's ultimately what I could see potentially coming in and why this battle may ensue here. When you look at performance away from home, when you look at schedule, when you look at consistency, San Francisco's better in those three areas. Matchup-wise, a couple things to think about is Murray State loves to attack the rim. They're 15th in the country in near proximity shot attempts. But despite facing better competition, San Francisco's 27th in near proximity defense. That does change if Mosulski can't go or is a shell of himself. The other factor is being able to slow Murray State down in transition. About 22% of their shots come in transition. San Francisco allows about 27% of shots to be taken in transition. So San Francisco has to be able to get back on defense, not allow the racers to get out, because when they do, they're deadly. 13th in transition efficiency on offense for Murray State. The other guy to look for here is Tevin Brown. He's got a mate in Justice Hill. Both can shoot from three for Murray. San Francisco, top 10 in defensive three-point efficiency. So for me, when I look at this on paper, like it's very difficult because I do have San Francisco power rated better than Murray State. I do respect the group that came out. I think we're going to have a battle on our hands here. I am off this game altogether until there's a little bit more clarification on it, when and if I expect the San Francisco money to finally show up. But I think we're going to end up having a battle here. And I think this is an interesting game because you have a San Francisco coach that schematically does some great things that I'm sure will give Murray State some trouble. But this just feels like one of the best games we have in the first round. And ultimately, these are two teams that were bye teams for us and we thought could make some potential noise. And of course,
the committee doesn't like to see mid-majors prosper in the Big Dance. So rather than playing one of these teams where they should properly be seeded against some of the bottom feeders from the Big Ten or some of the other conferences there, they take it out of their hands and go, you know what? Let's play these guys against each other. And you know what your prize is? If should you win a game, your Cinderella run is going to have to go through arguably the most talented 2 seed in the field in the form of the Kentucky Wildcats. But alas, that's the hand we've been dealt. And when you look at the Thursday night slate, I mean, this game alongside the Vermont-Arkansas game, both scheduled to tip off after 9 o'clock Eastern, much more attractive on paper, in my opinion, than the Kansas-Texas Southern showdown or Akron-UCLA. So for those casual fans who may not pay attention to these teams during the season, these are clearly the games that are worth watching. Want to remind all of you, like always, to follow Payne on Twitter, @PayneInsider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there on social media as well for some tournament coverage throughout. One other game in this region, Payne, and we, of course, waited to see who the St. Mary's Gales were going to be paired up with. It was ultimately the Indiana Hoosiers who outlasted Wyoming last night on Tuesday as far as one of the play-in games was concerned. This will be the best seed in program history for Randy Bennett's bunch as the Gales come in at a 5 spot. Indiana forced to travel across the country and play inside of 48 hours through 3 time zones. They weren't exactly dealing with the easiest travel situation, as I don't believe they got off the tarmac until about 4 o'clock in the morning local time. When you look at St. Mary's, we've been critical of the Gales in the past. When they lack athleticism, they want to spread you out. They can be slow. They can be plodding. That hasn't quite been the case for this St. Mary's team that's looked a lot more athletic. You go through their resume, and there's not really a bad loss in the entire group. Wisconsin, Colorado State, San Diego State, at BYU, Santa Clara, underrated by WCC standards, and Gonzaga twice. They do have the big win against Gonzaga, which I think opened people's eyes when you pull off the outright upset, catching 10.5 against an Indiana team who, you know what, to their credit, maybe found a little bit of something in the Big Ten Conference Tournament, and we've seen Trace Jackson Davis can be an absolute nightmare in terms of scoring at the rim.
Yeah, I mean, we watched Indiana survive last night against Wyoming. It was an ugly game from the onset. It's a Wyoming team that we had power rated outside the top 68, and I sent a tweet out on Sunday night that Wyoming really isn't a tournament team. And you mentioned one of the larger factors at the top there. I also saw one of your tweets, and it's not actually on court, and that is Indiana playing in Dayton, Ohio for a game that ended at nearly midnight Eastern Tuesday. And now they're traveling to Portland for a 4 p.m. local game Thursday. And my understanding is most updated right now is Indiana is in flight as we're recording. So talking about 36 hours to get acclimated in terms of body clock for a Hoosiers team that hasn't played a Pacific time zone game all season. I think that's interesting here. And then you think about that travel situation and the element off the court and kind of pair it with St. Mary's and how they play on the court. And certainly to your point, they're a little bit more athletic. They're a little bit more efficient. They do play a little bit more above the rim, but the Gales want to rough you up and they give you nothing offensively. St. Mary's allows 89 points per 100 possessions. They're top 10 in defensive efficiency. And the biggest part of this matchup is we don't really like Indiana's guards. So where the Hoosiers are most efficient is near the rim. Well, St. Mary's, 6th in the country defending near proximity shots. St. Mary's beating Gonzaga by 10 was very impressive. I think that's certainly raised their power profile in the eyes of odds makers. But when I look at our metrics, like, we still think they're a little bit underrated. They're more of a 4 seed than certainly Providence is. I think it's a really good team. Randy Bennett, I'm a huge fan of. Fantastic coach. He is surgical. He's going to come up with a pretty good game plan here. Mary's is certainly a veteran team. I was looking at their average age. It's almost 22 years old. Their starting point guard, Tommy Kusei, is a 6th-year, 24-year-old point
That's
guard.
young. Those
And
Australians don't
I
come
just
over
get-
here until they're 26 or 27 years old.
That is true. And so just kind of when I'm thinking about a team being fatigued, like we think Indiana could be, the last thing you want to face is a rested team that's going to grind you out and suffocate you 1,800 miles away from home. And this is probably going to be almost a home game, being on the West Coast. This opened 2.5 right away last night, Todd. And the line's only going to go in one direction in my mind. So I would be advancing St. Mary's here, certainly in your brackets. I'm going to poke around and see kind of what the market open is at a few other places, but I think we're out to 3 this morning. I don't know if a power number certainly suggests 3 being the right number, but again, we're higher on Mary's. We're not as high on Indiana. The travel situation's an absolute mess. The matchup is not great. And so all things point to St. Mary's here, and I can see why 2.5 got laid before we meet the 1 possession threshold.
Yeah, I mean, this
here at 3.
Indiana team, hey, let's not sugarcoat it. They were terrible down the stretch. They figured things out a little bit in the Big Ten tournament. Probably should have beaten Iowa before they folded late in the stretch. If Jordan Bohannon doesn't throw one in off the backboard from the parking lot to be able to move Iowa along before ultimately winning the conference championship. Indiana's strength this year has been defense. I mean, Coach Woodson hasn't exactly been an offensive wizard. You talked about some of the guard play. That is a real concern, especially in this matchup, because St. Mary's has a player in Logan Johnson that's one of the top defenders that'll have a chance to lock down Xavier Johnson if they're not able to feed the post. I don't think Indiana has any secondary punches or scorers capable of picking up the slack from Trace Jackson Davis if he isn't able to put this team on his back. I mean, this is a player that's gone for 20 in each tournament game Indiana has played this year, Big Ten, and obviously the opener in Dayton that we saw on Tuesday night. We do indeed have 2 regions left to go and a handful more games to break down, but we felt this is a perfect time to bring in a weekly fixture during the football season, our man from FanDuel. He joins us every Thursday throughout the course of football season. After about a 4-week hiatus for good behavior as Bet the Board podcast went dark, we figured John has been globetrotting the world trying to take advantage of a little bit of downtime. You, of course, can follow John Sheeran on Twitter at JSheeran. That's JSheeran 1981. And John, we have full intentions to come in and blast you with a battery of college basketball related questions, but let's not kid ourselves. Like we started at the top of the show asking Payne about the National Football League. That's probably the most logical spot to start with you as well. For a man that's been away from the office, I'm sure Tom Brady coming back on Sunday was exactly the time that you wanted him to shake up the betting markets.
Yeah, look, I'm excited. Obviously, Tom Brady's achievements, the way that he's rolled recently, I don't know that all of us were fully convinced that he was finished. But yeah, I think the timing was a little surprising, and sitting by the pool with my phone beeping, telling me Tom Brady was back in the league was an exciting time. But yeah, we obviously saw plenty of interest afterwards, and I think that's good, net.
Any other big moves that you guys have had to make in the NFL? Obviously, Russell Wilson getting traded from Seattle to Denver. We all anxiously await Deshaun Watson figuring out that particular landing spot, but we've seen a little bit more shuffling as far as the starting quarterbacks were concerned so far.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, some kind of surprising moves. I guess the biggest ones, in our opinion, were drifting the Steelers. I think that's reflective of the bit of bad business they've done settling for Trubisky. So I'm pretty surprised by that, because they had obviously plenty of other pieces around, and I thought that they would try everything they could to invest in maybe a better solution for quarterback than basically what is a replica of what they already have, and that is not very good quarterbacks. So they're ones that we've drifted a decent amount. Obviously, 2 days ago probably shortened the Chargers and the Jags. We also moved Carolina and New Orleans in a little bit, just with Watson trending that way. But obviously things have kind of developed in the last day or so that make it look questionable as to where he's going to go. The Bengals unchanged in our book. We kind of did what they expected to do, or did what we expected them to do. We're keen to pretty much be best price on them, so haven't really made any moves on their price despite the signings that they've made as well. So it's an ongoing monitoring piece, and interested to see particularly where Watson ends up.
The off season, and never a time for rest as it pertains to the NFL and the 7 days a week, 365 days a year business that it's truly become. But obviously the biggest event coming up this weekend, of course, is March Madness. We saw a couple of games tip off last night in Dayton. We'll have two more of the first four this evening before the tournament gets rolling in earnest on Thursday. And before I let Payne ask all the hard-hitting questions about some of the individual games, have you guys seen any big bets come in as far as the future pool is concerned, whether they be from recreational bettors that you extend house limits to, or maybe some sharp stuff that our listeners would appreciate hearing?
Yeah, I think, look, there's probably two large bets that we've taken this week. We had, I think, 300,000 on Duke at 17-1. That was a nice bet for us to lay. We don't like Duke at all, and obviously saw some of their issues recently as well. So that was one that we were happy to commit to. And then we took a bet of just under $250,000 at 10-1 on Kansas as well. So they're now our two worst results by some way in the book. Like I said, one by design, particularly around Duke. We're very keen to get them in the book, and they are, in the realms of 6 or 7 million of a loser for us right now in the future book. Kansas, from the bet I alluded to, and Tennessee is the other one in 7 figures for us. All bets that we're kind of happy to accommodate. Our traders are of the opinion that the front 4 or 5 in the market are by far and away the most talented teams, and I guess that doesn't surprise anybody, but we definitely consolidated the over-round and made sure that we had almost 100% across the front 5, and then kind of drifted out the others. So interested to see how that plays out. I'm not a fan of Gonzaga. The guys like them a lot and have been protective of their price for quite some time. It'll be an interesting debate when they get knocked out as to what we have in the office.
Payne, I'm shocked you moved that kind of freight on Duke. It's a team that you blasted to me over text message the last 7 to 10 days, and here you go laying a 6-figure wager down at FanDuel to try and get one of the better numbers in market.
Yeah, Duke can't defend a chair, so that's typically not my type of future bet. And in general, I'm not a big future player this time of year entering those high hold markets, as our listeners know. You did mention some of the teams that you took some big bets on. Kansas was as high as 18-1 last week, as Todd mentioned off air a little bit here when we were talking. But Kansas specifically, when you look at that Midwest region, I know you guys were happy to take that bet, but I look at our power ratings within the top 40, and there's only 6 teams in that region, whereas Gonzaga's got 11 in their region. Does that bode any concern possibly with the Kansas future?
Probably. I mean, that is considered in our price right now. They are, bigger than 2-1. We have their probability somewhere more like 25% to win the Midwest. So they still have a decent amount to go from there. And when you do the math and get them, as a 3-1 true probability chance of winning the Midwest, it's not that difficult to get to 10-1 for them to win it outright. So, fully cognizant of kind of where they've landed in the Midwest and what that, region looks like. That said, still a bet we were happy to lay at 10-1.
Makes complete sense. Remy Martin is back controlling point guard duties for Kansas. Does make them a little bit different. Okay. So you don't like Duke. You were happy taking the Tennessee future. You were happy taking the Kansas future. You think Gonzaga's personally not the team to beat. Who do you like this year?
That is a good question. I mean, we've liked Arizona all season long. We were pretty high on them at the start. Again, I just feel like the price is long gone on them, obviously, given the trajectory they've been on all season. Yeah, it is certainly an interesting one because there's a difference of opinion here, right, between the traders and I, and they, have watched a lot more college basketball than I have for sure. So it's only right and fair that they get the opportunity to kind of set the line. So, we are a little short, like I said, on Gonzaga 3-1. Kentucky were a team I thought could make a run. We saw them shorten and contract in the market 14-1 into about 8.5-1 this year. And I think Baylor need to get probably a little bit healthier now than they have been for a lot of the regular season. So I wouldn't sleep on them at about 12-1. They'd kind of just be my two picks against the field. But the guys are pretty heavy on the likes of Gonzaga and Arizona as well.
Kentucky is certainly an interesting team. When we get into Thursday and Friday, that's what everyone wants to hear. Is there anything that's come across your desk that's either very sharp or something you anticipate having a ton of liability and a rooting interest for from the house?
Yeah, I think, look, we'll have liability everywhere. Given the amount of games, it won't be that significant. Obviously, we'll get a good spread of cash across the games, given the concurrency and just the sheer volume that is on a daily basis. So I'll try and kind of point people in front of some of the sharper moves we saw and then maybe some of the internal opinions that we have. Memphis was certainly one of the first ones that we saw. I think we opened at 1.5. We saw a number of our kind of sharper customer base on at 1.5. I think we're 2.5 or 3 right now, but still seeing kind of more of their money than the other side. So if you can get 2.5 on Memphis, I would suggest that's probably not a bad bet based on what we've seen. Gonzaga was one that, despite the guys liking, we opened them a little bit under where some of the other operators were. I think we opened 24.5. It was as high as 27.5, 28 on the other side, but we definitely saw some smart money on Georgia State. Lots of people thought they should have been a 14 or 15 seed and got unfortunate, drawn 16. 23.5 right now, maybe a little low, but if you can find a 24.5 out there, I would suggest that one's probably not the worst one you'll have either. Rutgers, -1. Notre Dame money has definitely come there a favourite now. At -1, so Rutgers out to +1. You won't be able to bet on that in New Jersey, but everywhere else, I would just side with the Irish on what we've seen as well. And then the last one, Yale money, I think against Purdue, some sharp accounts on there at 17, 16.5. It's into 15.5. I think Purdue been pretty disappointing lately. Haven't covered spread since something like early February, believe it or not. So not surprising that we saw Yale money there.
Interesting. Yale kind of the surprise team to get in. Committee, and I think the rest of us had Princeton slotted in there. Yale does struggle with size inside, so that will be an interesting one to see unfold. One question I do have before I kick it back to Todd is you mentioned volume. What's the over-under for volume that FanDuel is going to take on the March Madness tournament?
That's a good question, and not a question I was prepared for. I didn't actually look at it. It's just so hard for us right now, Payne, with the trajectory of the business, the scale, the growth year on year, that it really is kind of pointless looking back at kind of where it related to last year. But we will, we're happy to kind of share it as we get through the tournament or even afterwards as to where it kind of sits.
Yep.
But it's certainly obviously a high profile event, one of the key points in the calendar for us. And I'm excited by what we can do. The guys have got hold of a new college basketball model recently in the regular season, and we're excited to roll that out for the tournament and see how it performs along with the traders. So lots of opportunities there for people maybe to have a little bit of a bet against FanDuel, and maybe we'll be slightly off market in some games given our new model. So interested to see how that all goes.
John, you mentioned the importance of it, and I think, as a logical follow-up to that, Payne kind of led us to the perfect spot. So many people equate the Super Bowl to being the single largest event. We know from a one-game standpoint, with the laundry list of props, the betting handle there is through the roof. But to your point, talking about March Madness and knowing that we're going to have 60-plus games from now until they crown a national champion 3 weeks from Monday, suffice to say that this event may be even more important as far as what it means to FanDuel, given the fact that it goes on so much longer than just a one-game sample size in the Super Bowl?
It's a good question. I'd really have to do some digging just to kind of figure out, how it compares. The volumes, we did almost 200 million in handle, 8 million bets on the Super Bowl. That is pretty phenomenal. And I just have to have a look at it and just see how it kind of compares across the college basketball landscape just to see where it lines up. But happy to look at it as we get through the tournament, and even have a look at Thursday, Friday, Saturday this weekend and see how those volumes play out. I would expect them to be comparable to an NFL Sunday. I think there's that much demand for it. So when you roll it all up, given the length of it, as you said, wouldn't surprise me at all if it's more important from a volume perspective than the Super Bowl for sure.
Always interesting when recreational bettors out there convince themselves they know as much about the Wright States, Bryants, and South Dakota states of the world as they do the New England Patriots, Green Bay Packers, and Los Angeles Rams. Last but certainly not least, when it leads up to a weekend of this magnitude, what does John Sheeran do Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? Are you in the office 14 hours a day? Do you get a chance to have a few pints and remove yourself from it? But what does the 96-hour window look like when March Madness kicks off in earnest Thursday morning with Colorado State, Michigan?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll be back in the office tomorrow morning. I'm in Arizona now, so flying back tonight and get back at it bright and early tomorrow morning. But, the guys, the team that we've built out have done a really good job looking after, and we managed to get away for, as you said, maybe a few pints and enjoy the kind of scene. I've been super impressed by March Madness as a viewing spectacle. Every year I've been here, I hadn't been exposed to it before, so I'll take advantage of all the good work the guys have done, leave them to it, and we'll worry about the outrights and stuff like that when it happens after the day, and come back on the Monday morning and quarterback it from there. I'm not that interested in sweating every game as they roll out.
He is the best in the business from a behind-the-counter perspective, and we're lucky enough to have him every Thursday throughout football season. And whether John knew it or not, unfortunately, he's now locked in from now until they hand out the national championship trophy. So we'll have him each of the next couple of Thursdays, schedule permitting. Encourage all of you, our loyal listeners, to follow John on Twitter at JSheeran. That's JSheeran 1981 on Twitter. John, best of luck this weekend, my friend. Safe travels, and enjoy the battery of basketball that we'll see starting on Thursday.
Will do. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the weekend.
Payne, I realized after we spoke to John and we recorded early in the morning before you and I jumped into the fold that you pointed out something extremely valid and relevant that I think probably bears repeating here for our loyal listenership so they don't think I've lost my damn mind. Do you care to repeat that?
I don't know what it was. I was writing down timestamps.
Oh, my days of the week. So, yes, I know it's Wednesday. John will be with us Wednesdays throughout the tournament, so I don't want to create that added layer of confusion for those folks who've grown accustomed to our format as it pertains to the big March Madness editions for what we do around these Bet the Board parts. So did want to say that. It was interesting, though, Payne, to hear John talk about some of the six-figure bets that they've seen on some of the perennial college basketball blue bloods.
Yes. So first of all, next 2 Wednesdays, we will be back. In terms of the bets they took, I would be very comfortable with taking those bets on Duke as well. I know they've taken some very sharp money in their opening round game. A couple groups I know laid 17. It's why we're out to 18.5. And, it's probably not a pressure environment there in the opening round. But we've not seen Duke actually play well down the stretch. And I know everyone will look at the UNC game and, Coach K's final game at Cameron, you lose it. It's a rival, no biggie. But I wasn't impressed with anything they did in the AAC tournament. You start to think about going to the wire with a Syracuse team that was out without Buddy Boeheim, without Edwards. Cole Swider had 4 fouls with 15 minutes to go in the game, and you're trailing 78-77 with 3 minutes to go. Now, you end up winning because you finished the game on a 10-0 run, but they weren't impressive there. Followed it up with a win against Miami that was very unimpressive as well. And then you got smoked by Virginia Tech. So they have not really played well down the stretch, even in their wins. We know they're having trouble defending. This takes buy-in. And it's clear that when Coach K made this move to going with the one-and-done players, he's not good enough as a coach at this point to get them schematically in line. And so these are problems that we saw defensively early in the season that by the time middle of March rolls around, you should have those issues rectified, and he hasn't. So I would be happy taking a large bet on those guys as well. If they even get to the point where they face a Gonzaga, they're not going to be able to slow Gonzaga down scoring. And a lot of guys that I know, if you're looking at brackets, typically have Texas Tech trending towards beating a Duke team because they think they could give them some trouble and certainly score enough offensively due to those lapses of defense, and certainly Texas Tech will choke you out offensively. So those are the things that I've seen from Duke. I would not be fearful of that future in any.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Duke team who, let's not kid ourselves, individual talent as good as any team in the country, but when you put all those pieces together, when they don't pull in the same direction, to your point, didn't see adjustments, didn't see grit, didn't see fire, didn't see tenacity, any of the things that you need to win 6 games to cut down the nets and be crowned national champions. Individual talent is one thing, but if everybody isn't all buying into the same overall ideology, it's going to make things tough. But you raise another interesting point when you talk about Duke and Kansas. Duke, of course, probably being unwarranted as a 2 seed. Kansas as a 1. When you look at the top of the field, how do you guys see things stacking up? Gonzaga a clear-cut number 1, or is it a lot more bunched given all of this parity that we've seen or the narrative that's being fed to us by a lot of the media outlets?
Yeah, Gonzaga's our number 1 team, and I think John, even though he said he hadn't been really keeping up with basketball all that much, I'm in lockstep with him. I don't think Kentucky's getting enough attention, and I think they can make a serious run in this tournament. Ultimately, that second-round game against an underseeded Murray State or San Francisco could present some issues, but I don't really see Baylor being that team. Certainly Baylor's transitioned to life without some of their key cogs, and they're playing with a 6-man rotation that seems to be playing better down the stretch, but I just don't know if they have enough juice. But Kentucky, to me, is very interesting. When
I look at that East region, too, you mentioned that game, and it almost reminds me of when Kentucky played that very good Wichita State team in a 7-10 opening round matchup, and you saw Kentucky kind of use that as a spark to create a little bit of noise, or a second-round game. My memory, leaving me high and dry here.
How long ago was that?
Landry Shamet, I think, was the guy. Yeah. But when you look at the region, I couldn't agree more that I think if Kentucky is able to get through the mid-major, whether it's an in-state showdown against Murray State or an underseeded USF team, the only team that I look at in the bracket, and with no disrespect meant to Purdue fans, that would really scare me if I was Kentucky, would be the pedigree and some of the star power and defensive-minded nature that UCLA could provide if those were the teams we saw in a 2-4 matchup in the Elite Eight.
That's the thing, is I really like St. Mary's. I really like UCLA, and they're going to be potentially pit against each other in the second round. So that one's going to be difficult. And I think either of those teams could make some noise. There's no doubt about that. For whatever reason, UCLA is not getting a ton of love. And I know they're not the most efficient basketball team. We've been over this for like 2 seasons now, where they're just making gobs of inefficient 2-point jump shots. And we've seen a ton of love from professional bettors on Akron for the opening round game. But water's got to meet its level. Eventually, we're kind of getting to a number here that just doesn't show value for me on Akron at this point. And I know a lot of people are always looking for upsets, and I just don't think that's going to happen here. But UCLA St. Mary's is going to be a wild second-round matchup, and I could see either of those teams making it to the Elite Eight and potentially giving Kentucky.
Yeah, UCLA, looked great in the first half against Arizona, and then they kind of hit a drought in the second half, and the Wildcats were able to pull away in that Pac-12 championship game. But we'll see if that level of experience with a roster that returned largely intact from last year's improbable run to the Final Four can replicate some of that magic. And when you talk about Magic, a team that a lot of people believed in early in the year, I know some of the advanced metrics have this team rated a heck of a lot higher than where they were seated. That would be the Houston Cougars, who will do battle with UAB in their opening round matchup at Houston. An 8.5-point favorite, total on the game 136.5. This will mark the first meeting between these programs since they were both members of Conference USA. UAB back in the tournament for the first time since 2015. In that tournament, they pulled an upset over then-seeded number 3 Iowa State. Meanwhile, the Blazers' 7-game win streak included a multi-overtime thriller against Middle Tennessee State that came complete with plenty of point spread drama, depending on the number that you had locked in for that contest. Meanwhile, Houston, a perennial team back in the tournament for the 4th straight year. Prior to this run, though, they'd only made the dance once in 25 seasons. Kelvin Sampson Payne deserves more credit for the coaching job, in my opinion, that he's done this year, maybe than any other year that he's been at the helm for Houston. Lost 4 starters coming into the season from last year's Final Four team, but if that wasn't enough, lost Marcus Sasser and Tremont Mark back in December. The 2 losses for Houston, where they really struggled against Memphis in conference. They failed to exceed, 1 point per possession. But we know Houston gets to the glass as well as any team in the country. UAB, not a ton of size, and may really struggle in that department.
Talk to me about Houston.
I don't hate Houston. What I will say is that Houston threw up enough bricks in the tournament exit last year to build a homeless shelter. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing brand of basketball, but these guys will fight you tooth and nail because Houston, unlike most teams that can actually make perimeter jumpers, Houston's best offense is a missed shot coming straight out of the Bob Huggins playbook.
Just taking shots.
I had to. I know who's in the family. I know who's in the coaching tree. I got to take as many shots as I possibly can.
So you woke Houston up, even if they don't know it. I got a text message during the Cincinnati game that said, man, Houston stinks. And then they just went on fire.
They played with a chip on their shoulder, especially in the AAC final. I got to give them credit. They look like a team that was fully pissed off having lost to Memphis twice during the regular season.
Yes.
They were fully engaged, wanted to be there, and I tip my hat to a team with a veteran-laden group that played with something to play for.
So this may shock some people, and you did mention the 2 injuries. If not for those 2 injuries, we have them power rated better than Duke.
And you know what? I've seen Duke. Duke would be curled into the fetal position if they had to face this level of physicality and toughness that Houston would throw at them.
So what stinks here is, again, it's 2 teams that the committee paired against each other that were bye teams in Houston and UAB. And yes, you mentioned Houston being down the 2 key cogs, and it's true, but like Sasser and Mark, they've been out since December. So they've kind of lived life without those 2. They know what it's like. And I do think ultimately those 2 guys being out is what could prevent a serious run in giving Arizona potentially all they can handle. Now, if you listen to Sasser, he's claiming he wants to play at some point in this tournament, has the broken foot, typically takes 3 to 4 months. It happened 3 months ago. He's itching to get back. I don't know if it's going to happen. When I look at this game, though, you mentioned it. UAB has nothing inside. So it becomes the Jordan Walker show. And I don't think Sampson, with 5 days to prepare, is going to let a 5'9" guard beat him.
That dude can shoot.
Houston
dude can
has big
shoot.
Guards. Yep. He lets it chuck. He also likes layups to extend leads to 11 with about 11 seconds to go for some ungodly reason.
He was hunting 40 that night, buddy. He was hunting 40.
He was hunting for 40 and killed the cover. That is certainly true. If you look at Houston, big guards, right? And so you can throw some of those big guards at him. And you look at like a Taj Moore who's 6'5" and super long and lanky, and maybe that gives Jelly Walker some trouble. I would fully expect Sampson to trap ball screens here. They rotate very well. If you look at the 3 games where UAB's faced similarly ranked defenses like a South Carolina, like a San Francisco, like North Texas in the most recent meeting, those 3 teams held UAB to 63, 61, and 57. They're all kind of in that same defensive class as Houston, although Houston's a little bit better, but all top 30 defenses in efficiency. If Houston's able to contain Jelly Walker and have him score like the inefficient 20, 23, 25, with lots of long threes, it's going to be tough to score. And if that's the case, I'm not sure UAB can survive defensively. I mentioned UAB's lack of size. They're 278th in allowing near proximity shots defensively. Houston 6th in the country making near proximity shots. Houston typically dominates this class of opponent. They tend to struggle when they step up and play elite teams. UAB kind of feels like Houston light athletically. The matchup is bad. And if this is a game where one team's chucking contested threes and the other scoring at the rim, and you have a couple-minute cold streak from Jelly Walker, could put this thing out of touch. And God forbid, like Trey Jameson or KJ Buffin get in foul trouble for UAB, and those guys have a tendency to get in foul trouble, it could be tough. So I do when I look at this, I think the number's probably a touch inflated, like 8.5 feels kind of high. We make it about a point lower. I just don't like the matchup. I think it stinks. And quite frankly, these are the teams that Houston just embarrasses. And there's really only one punch at this point for UAB. And I just think, you have 5+ days to prepare. Sampson's going to come up with something to make Jelly Walker.
When you look at Houston, what's the ceiling for this team in the tournament?
It's a good question. Obviously, I love Houston. I've liked them for many years, probably more than the entire market. I am a fan of Sampson. I think he can coach. And we do have Houston power rated better than Duke. But unfortunately, I don't think without Sasser and Mark, their style is necessarily a good one to go up against Arizona and think that they have a fighting chance. As you mentioned, right, a lot of stuff inside, a lot of second chance points, crashing the offensive glass. When you look at Arizona's height, it probably wouldn't bode overly well. And you're looking at an Arizona defense that defends the two very well. They are also top 50 in near proximity defense as well. So that's a tough challenge. And ultimately, I think when you look at this setup, where the committee has absolutely screwed the AAC, where an SMU should be in, Memphis clearly isn't a 9, and Houston is probably closer to being power rated in the top 5 than an actual 5 seed, they probably get bounced in the Sweet 16 round. But had you placed them in the Midwest, where we have them power rated much better than a Wisconsin or a Providence, but if you put them in that lower tier of the Midwest and made them a 3 seed, where Wisconsin is, you could certainly see even Houston without full health make a Final Four run. But in terms of the bracket, and this is something we probably should have touched on at the top, and ultimately you've probably heard it a couple times, we've been doing these podcasts for 4, 5, 6, 7 years now, and the evolution of the sports betting content space is very much monkey see, monkey do. So people listen to this type of podcast and then go and create their own content and just regurgitate what's said on shows like this. If you are doing a bracket podcast, or a bracket pool rather, and you are in one with your buddies, you're in one with people at the office, you're in one with your family, and it's got 8, 10, 12, 14, 17 guys, you're going to want to go with a lower variance bracket and move an Arizona forward. But if you're in a CBS pool or an ESPN pool and there's millions of people entering these things, you're going to want a higher variance pool, so maybe you will extend Houston past in Arizona.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of game theory that I think is worth repeating here. If you're in a pool with 1,000+ entries, or you're trying to make a splash, go big or go home. Try and zig when everybody else zags. But if you're in a pool that's a little bit friendlier, maybe not so friendly, but a smaller amount of entries and volume, to Payne's point, you may want to stick with some of the higher seeds and mirror the field, figuring out where you can make up ground elsewhere in that field. To your point, talking about Arizona, it'll be interesting to see exactly how healthy Krissa is. The picture that he put out on social media of that ankle, which I would assume is a high ankle sprain, I'm not sure he plays this weekend like he was optimistic about or said he wanted to. I'm not sure Kress is available until Arizona potentially gets the Elite Eight or maybe even a Final Four. If Houston was to pull off that upset, you would need a career performance from a streaky shooter in the likes of Kyler Edwards to get something done, who does have a little bit of tournament experience. But before Houston could potentially get to that matchup, assuming they take care of business of UAB, they would have to go through the winner of the Illinois-Chattanooga matchup, a 4-13 showdown, where it's the Fighting Illini, a 7.5-point favorite, total at 135.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook, in a game that you'll be able to see Friday afternoon at 6:50 Eastern Time. UTC 2-0 all-time versus the Fighting Illini, which includes an NCAA Tournament victory way back in the late 90s. Meanwhile, Illinois head coach Brad Underwood, 3-5 in the Big Dance, but no stranger to being in some of these spots. Illinois looking to try and get back to their first Final Four since 2005, Surprisingly enough, they haven't been in the Sweet 16 since 2005 either, which is a bit of a black eye for a proud program. Meanwhile, Chattanooga, the Mocs, back in the dance for the first time since 2016, played arguably one of the more entertaining and exciting title games in dispatching Furman in overtime with a couple of last-second shots. They ran through their league, dominating the SoCon by an average points per game margin greater than 10. They're 12 true road game victories, with the most in Division I this season, and they have a couple players to watch, highlighted by Malachi Smith.
Chattanooga is really interesting to me because if you watch them play, they kind of remind you of Wisconsin, and that's not completely surprising because Lamont Paris, their head coach, is a former Badger assistant. And I think at its core, when you look at Chattanooga, it's the kind of underdog you want attempting to slay the dragon. They have some size to deal with Kofi, really good guards. Nuga can hit the 3, and they slow the game down to an absolute crawl. They are a half-court offense, 319th in possession length. They do rebound it well enough to not give up second chances as well, and that's kind of the pedigree you want from an 8-point dog. In saying that, after, we had this embarrassing exit from Illinois in the tournament last season, we've heard Brad Underwood, we've heard some of his guys saying all the right things this week about focusing in like never before. We know the talent's there. Illinois is clearly rested. We've kind of been waiting for them to peak, and it just hasn't happened. Maybe it never does. Matchup-wise, when I look at this, Illinois forces you to take bad shots. Underwood does a really good job kind of having his guards blitz the three-point line. And then with Kofi on the back line, most teams end up settling for mid-range shots. Chattanooga is 10th in mid-range efficiency. So if they are hitting their mid-range shots, they have a chance. It's just, as we know, the least efficient way to play basketball is taking contested mid-range shots. Offensively, if you're facing Illinois, you want to put Kofi in conflict, right? Make him defend ball screens, make him defend pick and roll. Chattanooga's outside the top 300 in pick and roll frequency. Chattanooga also likes to run its offense through the post. You have Josh Anai, you have the Kansas transfer there and De Sousa in the post. Chattanooga's 18th in post-up frequency. The problem is that's not really the way you want to attack Illinois in Kofi defensively. Illinois is 9th in allowing near proximity shots, 45th in defending them. So this one's tough for me because on the surface, Chattanooga has everything you want, from the kind of tempo to the guards, to the shot making, the rebounding, but how they actually attack offensively isn't the most conducive way to beating Illinois. But if you can hit enough shots, 8 is a big number. And I don't know. I'm hearing like all of the talking heads, right? How Chattanooga's the side here. Chattanooga's the best dog to be backing here. And I don't really like to get caught up in that kind of stuff. But Chris is now the highest in the market. They're at 8. This open 6. Again, typically 7 has a lot more relevance in terms of key numbers in college basketball during the regular season than now, but it's still a relevant number that's worth more than 5 cents, and we've just kind of blown through that number. And so market indicators are kind of saying something drastically different than a lot of the talking heads, which makes me a little nervous here.
Definitely a cause for concern, and I think you raised some interesting points. I mean, when you talk about having size in the middle to contend with Kofi Cockburn, arguably the most important player for Chattanooga in this matchup will be Kansas transfer Silvio De Sousa. If he gets into foul trouble and they can feed the big fella at the rim, it's game over. And when you look at some of the numbers Kofi put forth this season, they're somewhat staggering. 21 and 10 on 60% shooting. He's only the 5th player in league history to average those type of numbers. It's what helped earn him first-team All-American status. And Trent Frazier on the outside, breaking all sorts of Fighting Illini records. 1st in minutes, 5th in points, 2nd in threes all time. And like we talked about, it is a basketball program very rich in tradition. So we'll see exactly what happens. I think the basketball purists out there, while you oftentimes find yourself rooting for Cinderellas in some of these smaller programs, the matchup that we should want to see in the second round will be Brad Underwood against Kelvin Sampson in that 4-5 matchup between Illinois and Houston. I know, Payne, a lot of our listeners thinking, man, these guys are jumping all over the place. It's Thursday to Friday. It's no Vegas rotation. We are trying to be somewhat conducive for folks following along on their brackets. On the left-hand side, they go down the columns, left to right, etc. And it takes us back to the first game of the tournament that'll kick everything off on Thursday morning, Michigan and Colorado State. You talked about market indicators. Well, this one has been fascinating to watch some of these lines move. Michigan now down to a 1-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game, 136.5. We saw the Rams head coach Nico Medved in an interview he did with CBS's Matt Norlander talk about travel issues and not getting their moving papers, whatever you want to call them, figuring out how the charters were going to work. Very fascinating to see that unfold. Meanwhile, they'll oppose a team in Michigan who comes into the field with the worst winning percentage of anybody, a shade less than 55% with a 17-14 record. But all of that pales in comparison to some of the injury news that broke Wednesday morning, and we saw the market adjust accordingly with money coming in on Colorado State and this game getting hammered under the total.
Yes. You did a good job presenting this game, and I think we kind of just start from the top and then kind of go down to the most recent events. And I understand all of the early money on Michigan, and I think if you're betting Michigan here, you're relying on a couple things, right? One, the metrics to be right, in that a team 3 games above 500 is power rated inside the top 30. The other thing you're looking at here is the way you make the dance by being 3 games over 500 is that they have just played an absolute gauntlet of a schedule, and that they are super battle tested, and that there's a little bit more going on behind the scenes, and that Juwan Howard's taking on more of the, God, I hate to talk crap about him, but more of the cheerleader role, and Phil Martelli's kind of pulling the strings a little bit more in terms of the game plans and the X's and O's, and I think that's probably the right strategy, is let Juwan be the figurehead, let him be the CEO, let him be, the recruiter, and then let Phil Martelli kind of cook. And so that, I think, is a little bit better of an approach here. And so we've seen them have a little bit better of a semblance of what's going on schematically in my mind. But Michigan's played a very tough schedule. And then you mentioned the situation. The committee screwed Colorado State over in this.
Shocker.
Is that
shocking?
They are a 6 seed traveling to Big Ten country to play an 11 seed Big Ten team. Now, for us, Colorado State is more like a 10 seed. So they got that wrong as well, but they don't know that. And so for whatever reason, they gave a home court advantage to the team they deemed better or more worthy. We saw its Mountain West brothers last night get beat up pretty good, right?
Oh,
Wyoming and
here
Utah
we
State
go.
both
A
lost.
tradition as old as time. Payne coming out, making fun of the West Coast for being soft, and taking his annual pot shots at the Mountain West, which, to your credit, has been a conference that underwhelming isn't a strong enough adjective to describe their performances in the dance. But continue.
I love the Mountain West. I typically will go to the Mountain West tournament. It's one of my favorites to attend. I'm more of a Vegas guy for conference championship week than I am for the actual tournament. So Mountain West was one that I would frequent, but you would always notice that no one in the Mountain West actually guards. And that's why San Diego State typically does very well in this conference. But point being here is Wyoming looked very porous last night. We saw Maldonado have some troubles, right? When you're playing more athletic, more strong, better recruits, it's tough to post those guys up. So he had a slew of turnovers, against Indiana last night. Utah State was a 5-point favorite that lost outright by double digits. This is just not a good conference. There's also been, as you mentioned, the serious travel issues for Colorado State. We also know Colorado State has been one of the luckiest teams all season, 6th in the luck metric. And then we kind of play this game out in terms of informationally. We saw early sharp money on Michigan at places that opened pick 'em. Everyone else kind of opened a consensus too. We were at 2.5 to most places, but once it started to trend towards 2.5, 15 on Michigan, late last night, a group I spoke to said, hey, we're going to dabble CSU +3 on the buy here because it's cheap. And then we saw a few PPH shops trend towards 1.5. And I probably shouldn't just ask questions. I should just go. Because now we know why my contact was taking 3. And it's because Devontae Jones, Michigan senior guard and key contributor, is out with a concussion. And Michigan obviously runs their offense through Hunter Dickinson. And that's probably still going to be a thing. Michigan's 11th in the country in near proximity shots. Colorado State defensively outside the top 200 and near proximity defense. So Michigan still has that edge down low. But when you're looking to play inside out, Todd, right, having Jones there to knock down a few threes would have been nice. And that's ultimately why this morning we've seen this line go from, 2.5, 2 down to 1.5, even some 1 in places. And then we've seen the total get buried under from 140. We're now down to 136.5 some places. It's because of this injury that popped up this morning.
Do we think Michigan returning to the scene of the crime and their conference tournament loss at Gamebridge Fieldhouse will be good for them to exercise the demons? I mean, and obviously help with that level of familiarity, knowing that they're going to play a game where their body clock suggests, hey, look, it's a normal tip-off at 12:15 Eastern against a Rams team that'll feel 2 hours earlier, but basically playing breakfast basketball.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it, right? Time zones better, situations better with travel, familiarity with environment, right? I mean, they've played in this building before. They understand it, right? When you go rent an Airbnb and you can flip on the lights and not know where the silverware is, but in your own house, in a place that you're familiar with, right? You can roll out 1 o'clock in the morning and locate the pisser and don't need to turn the lights on. That's kind of the familiarity thing matters. And so, again, the committee did no favors for Colorado State here. But again, Colorado State, maybe that's the basketball gods, right? Suddenly Devontae can't clear the concussion protocol somehow in, a week's time. But that's maybe the break they get. This is a pretty good team. I think they're coached really well. And ultimately, we talked about Hunter Dickinson. The one thing, and you did bring this to my attention, is while Colorado State has trouble defending near proximity shots. Defensively, the way they're built schematically, they don't allow a lot of those shots. Now, it is the Mountain West. There aren't a ton of like great post-up guys in that league, but that'll be the area. If Colorado State can survive down low and Hunter Dickinson just doesn't own this game, Colorado State has a real chance to win it.
And, I mean, of course, we know people will be watching first game of the tournament, and if you're trying to keep tabs on Colorado State's X Factor, David Roddy, to his credit, has been an outstanding player all season long. He'll be a fun watch. But a fascinating game when you see some of these intersectional showdowns, a team that a lot of people thought, was or wasn't worthy of inclusion in the field in Michigan, to your point, talking about Colorado State being grossly overseeded, then having to travel across the country. So many unique variables factoring in there, most notably, to your point, the injury to Devontae Jones, that'll change exactly what we get from this Michigan and a high-low offense. From the South, though, we head off to the final region, and it is the Midwest, and in a game that'll feature one of the hottest teams in the country, taking on the Richmond Spiders. That, of course, being the Iowa Hawkeyes, as Richmond will make their first appearance in the Big Dance since 2011. Meanwhile, Iowa, their fourth straight tournament appearance, the one flaw in Coach McCaffrey's resume since taking over in Iowa City. While they've won each of their round of 64 games, they've lost in the round of 32 in each of those prior tournament encounters. The Hawks, they finished 12-2 down the stretch, Big Ten Conference champions. During that span, they not only performed from a straight-up standpoint, they were great at the betting window as well. 10-4 against the number of their last 14, 8-2 over their last 10. And this Iowa team, maybe more so than what we've seen in the past, we knew how good Luka Garza was in terms of being able to score the basketball, but Keegan Murray's talent is far superior to that. He can create his own shot. He can get to the rim. This is a guy that you're going to see playing on the next level. And his 23.6 points per game is actually the highest rate among a player hailing from a power conference, 62% effective field goal percentage. Richmond, fortunate to be here, but it is a veteran-laden bunch who underwhelmed during the course of A-10 regular season play, seeded 6, put it all together, put together the run. But honestly, Payne, Chris Mooney's got his hands filled with an Iowa team that can score from a variety of different spots on the floor.
No doubt about it. And this is a game with contrasting styles, right? So this is one of those ones like, you have to be able to play it at your pace. Iowa's top 20 in average possession time. They're 13th in transition shots. Richmond, on the other hand, barely inside the top 200 in pace. They're outside the top 200 in average possession. They're 255th in transition shot attempts. So just two contrasting styles. Richmond's got to play it at their style to survive this thing, and that's really the only chance that they're going to have. They do a very good job cherishing the basketball, 9th in turnover. So that will help with some of the transition stuff, with trying to slow it down. That's obviously key. Iowa's defense does a very good job generating shots off steals. So again, if you're not turning it over, you can kind of avoid some of this streakiness to the game. But even if it's played in the half court, I think it's really difficult finding an area where Richmond can make Iowa vulnerable. And seriously, like, you look at Iowa, we know they're not a very good defending team. They are a little bit better this year. They're not great defending the arc, but Richmond outside the top 100 in both three-point attempts per 100 possessions and three-point efficiency. Iowa lets you take the mid-range jumpers you want. Richmond's outside the top 270 in mid-range attempts, barely inside the top 200 in mid-range efficiency. Where Richmond is best on paper is inside. Iowa's 28th in the country defending near proximity shots. So it's not a great matchup. We know Iowa doesn't really like to defend, although, again, a little bit better. But where you want to attack them, Richmond really isn't efficient doing those things. On the other end of the court, it's a total mismatch. Iowa's offense against Richmond's defense, right? Like, unless Iowa has a horrific game shooting, which can happen, right? It's a one-game setting. It's a one-game sample size. Unless they are horrific shooting, things don't look great on that end. Richmond doesn't stop dribble penetration well. They're outside the top 200 defending the three ball, 200th defending near proximity shots. The Spiders don't really have anyone that plays above the rim defensively, so they're only blocking about 7% of shots at the rim. You mentioned Keegan Murray. He should have a field day. You also have Perkins and McCaffrey. They should be able to score at the rack without much resistance as well. Here's what's interesting. I thought the opener was pretty fair. Clearly, there was one group in particular that did not. They got out. They laid 9 on Iowa Sunday evening. That's why we're at 10.5 now. To me, Iowa can be erratic. Their best is elite, top 5 like almost, but they're not the most consistent team, whereas Richmond is pretty steady Eddie. You know what you're getting. Matchup is terrible for Richmond. I am not running to lay 10.5 with Iowa at this point. I actually think you might see some Richmond money potentially come into the market at 10.5. I just think there's better ways to attack Iowa. I know you and I, Todd, talked a little bit, I think Tuesday, on potentially one of those ways to attack Iowa, and it might be with them just making it to the Sweet 16 round. If you shop around, it's about minus 150 on that future, as opposed to taking them in the futures market to make the Final Four or to win the whole thing, where I don't think there's much value there. But if you're looking at what a 10.5 point favorite is, and then you would potentially, factor in the rollover, you're looking at roughly a price that's in the market here on Iowa making the Sweet 16 minus $1.50. And if some things go awry, you'll probably be a little bit better in terms of value there. Plus, you kind of already know that Iowa at 9 is the side here.
And I'll be honest, too, the other thing about it, Iowa was a team that I was hell-bent on looking to try and make a case to fade in their opening round of the tournament, knowing the energy expended to win the conference tournament, the level of emotion, not just for players, but the fan base. But let's not kid ourselves. Richmond had to win 4 games in 4 days just to get to this point. So unfortunately, the situational college basketball gods did not allow us that particular opportunity. And rather than be stubborn and bang your head into the wall, you try and handle the cards you've been dealt and make the best of an opportunity, which may not provide for an Iowa fade at this particular juncture. The winner of Iowa-Richmond would take on the winner of Providence and South Dakota State. One of the more talked about matchups in the opening round. Providence comes in as the 4, South Dakota State as the 13, and you're looking at Providence, a 2-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game, 149.5. South Dakota State seeking its first ever NCAA Tournament victory. The closest loss that the program has had was a 5-point defeat. The Friars, meanwhile, they're seeking their first tournament victory going back to 2016. Ed Cooley comes in with an all-time record in the Big Dance of just 1-5. You mentioned the luck metric earlier when you talked about UConn, I want to say, was who we discussed within the Big East. There's no bigger embodiment of luck than what Providence has been able to accomplish. This is a team 11-2 in games decided by 5 points or less this year. They started the year 21-2. They've since cooled off, going 4-3 in their last 7, highlighted by a blowout loss at the hands of Creighton in the Big East tournament. When you look at South Dakota State, I mean, this team steamrolled everybody in their way in the Summit Conference. 21-game win streak, now the longest in the nation. 30 wins this season, a program record. They're second in scoring in Division I. They shoot the ball at nearly a 45% clip from beyond the arc. Should they not go ice cold, they'll have a chance to be the best in Division I as far as shooting the deep ball since Indiana did it in 93-94. But more impressively, Payne, they've shot better than 40% from beyond the arc in 10 straight games. It's the longest such streak in the nation this year. But I think the best spot to start would be with the number, fair or foul on the seeding, and the number that odds makers have set for this matchup.
Because I have ADD, it looks like, Colorado State plus 1.5 is going to get hit as well. So we could see this potentially trend towards pick'em. In terms of Providence, South Dakota State, tough, right? Like, I think in sports you have teams that are physically and mentally tough and they perform well in pressure moments, and sometimes the metrics can't really capture what that team is. But you did mention Providence being the luckiest team in college basketball this season, and by a long mile. And when you look at some of the data, they're the 3rd luckiest team in the Ken Palm era dating back 21 seasons. Only 2008 Wagner and 2021 Cleveland State have been luckier than this Providence team, okay? I don't love their resume the last 5 weeks either. If you look at who they've played, who they've beat, and how they've beat them, 5-3 down the stretch the last 5 weeks. 4 of those wins are by an average of less than 4 points. 3 of the 5 wins are in overtime. We have Providence power rated outside our top 45. But something is starting to stink a little bit here, because South Dakota State is just getting too much love for my liking from every Tom, Dick, Harry, and talking head this week. It's starting to make me a little nervous, although the line certainly indicates they're the side. When I look at South Dakota State, they have a really potent offense, obviously, which you mentioned. Top 15 in efficiency. They're averaging about 114 points per 100 possessions. They just shoot the piss out of it. Number 1 from beyond the arc. But they're also inside the top 90 for mid-range shots. They're top 40 at the rim. You have a guy like Baylor Shireman, who's a 6'6" point guard, uber efficient. South Dakota State just really, when you look at them, they've got a slew of guys offensively that are really interchangeable, right? They're 2, they're 3, they're 4. They're all about the same size. They can all play each of those positions. They're just assassins in the half court as well. They're number 1 in non-transition efficiency field goal percentage. It's the only team in the entire country above 60%, better than even Gonzaga. Now, obviously, I know, haven't faced the schedule, but I wonder if the matchup on the other end of the court has the larger discrepancy. Because South Dakota State's 7th in defensive efficiency in the Summit League. They can't defend a chair. And you just wonder if Providence's athleticism and their toughness and their size could eventually wear South Dakota down. You have a guy like Luke Appel, 6'8", really the only size the Jackrabbits have. Jared Bynum's really this, aggressive point guard for Providence. He likes to attack. I think they could live at the free throw line here. And if you look at UConn, right, number 1 in the country in getting to the charity stripe, the Jackrabbits against far lesser athletes in size in the Summit, they're outside the top 180 in near proximity defense. So I feel like UConn can kind of physical their way around the rim, and if they're not hitting those near proximity shots, the Jackrabbits are probably going to have to foul them. And then all of a sudden you just have a team that lives at the foul line continuing to live there. It's tough, right? For bracket purposes, things change a little bit here. And again, probably a lot of people that are semi-competent are going to be advancing the Jackrabbits. But certainly if you are in a pool where you get added points for the seeding, it's tough not to take South Dakota State because you just don't want to fall behind, right? In a game where odds makers are giving South Dakota State better than a 42% chance to win, and you're earning another 9 points in your bracket, it's tough not to put them ahead in that type of bracket setting where you get granted those added points.
Hey, there's a lot so much that goes into that kind of stuff.
Do you think this game closes? Where do you think this game
closes?
Because I've heard rumblings that South Dakota State's going to come in. I just don't know if it's going to or where it's
better chances
where it would
in
fall.
my opinion, better chances it closes pick than it closes 3.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to 3.
Now, if it's able to hold the market here, I think it's always interesting, because what's fascinating and what I came to see behind the counter, and granted I haven't been there for quite some time, that's always interesting, is talking heads start rallying around some of these teams. But oftentimes when bettors walk to the window, it's a much different crisis of confidence. They go, wait a second, do I really want to bet South Dakota State in this game? I think they're the trendy team. It's who I want to root for, but they waver a little bit in some of that level of conviction when it's time to put money down at the window. So I'm not quite sure exactly how this game will get bet. It doesn't appear to be that lopsided, at least from some of the indicators early on, but all that being factored into the equation, it still is Wednesday morning as we're recording. It's a hell of a lot different than what the bet splits will look like 10 to 15 minutes before tip-off, when all the recreational bettors start to plunk down their cash when they decide it's in their best interest to do absolutely no work, and I applaud them for that during the tournament's opening 2 rounds.
Makes complete sense. So. And as we are looking at this, John divulged a nice nugget that they took sharp money on Memphis, and now it looks like a second round on Memphis coming in at 2.5.
Yeah, game largely moving to 3 at some of the sharpest shops out there, along with the Tennessee Volunteers catching a bit of money, a game that I'm interested to see where that number goes for a variety of reasons. But given Rick Barnes' futility when it comes to ATS results, although this would be his most talented team since he was able to take his Texas edition to the Final Four years ago. Before we get into the final orders of business around these parts, Payne, I want to encourage all of our loyal listeners to go to FanDuel.com, use the promo code BetTheBoard. FanDuel has so many different promos to get you in action for this NCAA tournament. If you're looking to bet the bracket risk-free, you're going to log into FanDuel Sportsbook, you're going to opt into the promotion, place a wager on college basketball, and this offer will apply for those folks that already have active accounts with FanDuel. But if you're new to FanDuel Sportsbook, some great promos as well, 5 to win 150s, risk-free bets, a variety of ways for you guys to take advantage should you have been in hibernation since they handed out that Lombardi trophy. Again, also want to remind all of you, follow Payne on Twitter, @PayneInsider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. And Payne, I think we've done a good job of covering a lot of the landscape in college basketball, but as all of our listeners have grown accustomed to, there is one final thing that we do before we bid them a fond farewell for a week sabbatical. Where have you found the most investable opportunity in Thursday and Friday's basketball games?
Let's go with a Thursday evening game at the Dickies Arena. Are you going to be able to wear your Dickies? Are you going to put those on for good vibes?
I'll do what it takes. If it means it gives us a little bit of an intangible edge to get us to the window, I'm happy to be a team player around here. I'm team bet the board through and through.
Get you by some Chucks, and we'll just get you crip walking through the
yeah, I'm not sure that's
through the living room there as we watch this game. Let's go with 7-3-8 Creighton, San Diego State. Let's go with first half under 56 points. When I look at this game, right, Creighton's without their point guard. And yes, they've adjusted to life a little bit without him. Just not an efficient team, not a team that can shoot it from outside. You get San Diego State, who does like to pressure you a little bit. They guard the perimeter quite well. This just feels like when you look at the possession length, two teams that are outside the top 170 in possession length, two teams that slow it down a little bit, two teams that just have trouble scoring. I mean, San Diego State's got one primary scorer. No one else can throw it in the ocean. And so I think when you get a savvy team and a savvy head coach like Creighton has, they're going to be able to devise a game plan to stop one.
Yeah, think about it, Payne.
It just feels like slow it down game.
You can't,
it's just
no, you can't throw it. You can't.
Joke. I feel like you're making a joke.
I wasn't. Now it's lost its luster. I was going to say if you can't throw it in the ocean, you go to San Diego State. It's tougher to throw it in the ocean when you're playing in Texas.
There you go. There you go.
I'm not quitting my day job. Don't worry.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't do that. Let's go with the first half under there at 56 in Creighton, San Diego State. Let's get to the half. 27-25. That feels like a good vibe right there.
How about like 2018? Can we get a Wyoming, Indiana type first half where it's 11-8, 12 minutes in?
You get a little Creighton, Villanova type first half.
That would be glorious. That would be absolutely glorious. To be able to pull that off.
Kind of basketball.
The under 4-minute timeout, 13-11, San Diego State. That's exactly right in my wheelhouse.
There you go.
So
yes, back to our roots. Not shocking for anyone that's listened to our college basketball iterations. We do like the first half unders, and that one makes a ton of sense. So that's it. That's the best bet. Let's get out of Dodge. This podcast is going to run long.
Yeah.
Almost an hour and a half. There was one loyal listener.
I love it.
I'm not going to log into Twitter.
I love it.
But he said there's not a chance this thing's going to be out by 12:30, and boy is he bang on accurate. So that gentleman is at least 1-0 to start.
I was going to say I think it's Joseph Cormack. Is that who it was that said it?
I don't know. My memory's bad. I don't even know what I had for dinner last night. But I know there was one gentleman that was like, "There is not a prayer. This is out by 12:30 Eastern."
Well, when you eat boiled chicken every night for dinner, it shouldn't be that tough to remember.
I did. That's actually a good memory. I had chicken, brown rice, and a little broccoli. There we
Pretty
are.
much a safe bet. I'm going to make that a $3 favorite every night when you don't remember what you had for dinner. That's typically a $3 bet. It's not going to cash all 7 days of the week, but a high probability to get you to the window at least 6 of the 7. Do you have any final bits of wisdom you'd like to impart for folks on brackets, futures? You want to go through your PSA about betting in a high hold markets or anything like that?
I think we've done that. I think if you've listened to the podcast, right, we talked about futures coming out of John's interview. We talked about some bracket tips as we were discussing UAB and Houston. All the games will be time-stamped. We even got some disgruntled thoughts on the NFL, which I was hoping we'll make an off-season podcast after free agency. We'll do one this off-season for our loyal listeners. That's where we'll attack.
All right.
We don't attack football during the most glorious basketball week of the year. Leave it to Todd Furman to do something.
We don't want to break the sanctity of the NCAA tournament. Want to thank all of you, our loyal listeners.
Can I be candid before we leave here? Because we're already freaking long
go
enough
for
as it is.
What's a few minutes?
You're the only guy that gives me, you make me chuckle, right? Like we're in the midst of college basketball, March Madness, we have free agency. And as I'm laying in bed, I'm looking through Twitter and there Todd is giving us hockey updates on his Twitter.
It's what I do. Hey, we had one loyal listener out there waiting for when Bet the Board is going to get into the hockey iterations, and I'm not quite sure that content can live long enough to make it worth our time, but there are some plans in the works, maybe for...
If you want to know how good hockey tweets are, find a guy with 150,000 followers getting 4 favorites on a hockey tweet.
You know what?
In the middle.
Hey,
of March.
You know what? If I was pandering for likes and favorites, Payne, like most people in the sports gambling community these days, I would just claim every bet I had that lost, the game was fixed, and I'd have more.
We'll just have you start posting bathing suit shots. Maybe that'll get the.
I have been. I have been working on
some of the boys.
I have been working on my figure a little bit, but I need to get the tan going before we'll post those shots, and Ernest may have to steer people to the Bet the Board Instagram profile for that. But all right, we've gone way the hell off the railroad tracks at this point. I want to thank all of you, our loyal listeners, for those folks who've been with us throughout the course of the NCAA tournament coverage in previous years. Those folks who are new to Bet the Board this football season, like we said earlier in the show, we'll be back with you every Wednesday during March Madness, leading into the Sweet 16, leading into the Final Four, as we break things down the way only Bet the Board knows how to do. Follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. You can follow me there as well. Follow John Sheeran as well. I want to thank John for taking time out of his busy travels to join us to break things down from the book's perspective. And with a first half under ticket in hand for San Diego State and Creighton, hopefully we'll see you at the window.